Daniel's mornings had settled into a predictable rhythm ever since he started working remotely. With a steaming cup of coffee in hand, he would boot up his computer, ready to tackle the day. His wife, Amelia, often left the apartment early, calling out her goodbyes before heading to their shared remote office space. Since the pandemic had forced them both into remote work, this arrangement had become essential. The small studio apartment they rented didn't offer much space for two people taking calls all day, and the constant overlap had led to some heated arguments in the beginning. It wasn't easy at first. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in on them during those early days of working from home, and every minor annoyance felt magnified. They eventually decided to alternate between the apartment and the remote office, a compromise that brought a semblance of peace to their lives. Friends had warned them about the toll that remote work could take on relationships, and some even admitted it had led to their breakups. But Daniel and Amelia were determined to avoid that fate. The couple had been together for years, moving into their snug apartment with the shared goal of saving for a down payment on a house. In the beginning, it was filled with laughter, late-night chats, and the kind of bond that made Daniel believe they could handle anything together. But over time, the passion had faded into routine. Their conversations had grown more focused on logistics, budgets, chores, and schedules than on each other. Daniel tried not to dwell on it too much. He figured that all relationships go through phases and that this was simply a quieter chapter in their lives. Still, the occasional flicker of doubt would surface, leaving him wondering if they were truly as solid as they appeared. He never expected his doubts to grow into something larger until that one morning in December. After a frustrating call with a client, Daniel decided to take a break. He headed to the kitchen to make some tea, only to discover the box of tea bags was empty. Searching for an alternative, he reached into the cabinet above the counter, moving jars and containers around in hopes of finding some loose-leaf tea. That's when he saw it, a small velvet box tucked behind the tea canister. The box was unmarked, and curiosity got the better of him. Opening it, Daniel found a pair of gleaming cufflinks inside. The sight of them left him puzzled. He rarely wore formal attire, preferring casual clothes for both work and social events. Amelia had occasionally teased him about his lack of sartorial ambition, but this seemed like a strange gift. Maybe she's trying to surprise me for New Year's, Daniel thought, smiling briefly before closing the box and returning it to its spot. He reminded himself that they had agreed to exchange gifts early this year. Daniel was set to travel to the Far East to handle a family matter, leaving Amelia to celebrate New Year's with her friends. The cufflinks were likely her way of encouraging him to step up his style game. But as the day wore on, the memory of the box lingered in his mind. Something about it didn't sit right. Why had she hidden it? Amelia wasn't one for grand romantic gestures, and Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that the cufflinks weren't meant for him. His suspicions grew as small, inconspicuous details began to add up. The days leading up to New Year's Eve passed slowly, with Daniel's unease growing by the hour. Amelia had mentioned her plans to celebrate with close friends while he was away, but her recent behavior made him second-guess everything. She seemed distracted during their conversations and avoided making eye contact when he brought up their upcoming time apart. On the day before his supposed departure, Daniel got a call from his mother. "Son, you don't need to come anymore," she said cheerfully. "Everything's been sorted out. You can save the ticket money for something more important." Relieved, Daniel canceled his flight and decided not to tell Amelia. Instead, he used this unexpected change to observe her actions. Her demeanor hadn't changed. She still kissed him goodbye as he left the apartment with his suitcase in tow. She didn't even walk him to the door, preoccupied with tidying up the space. Daniel checked into a modest hotel not far from their studio. He spent the day going over his suspicions, replaying conversations and interactions with Amelia in his mind. He couldn't ignore the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The cufflinks, the distant looks, the overly casual explanation about her New Year's plans, it all seemed off. Finally, the evening of December 31st arrived. Amelia, unaware that Daniel had stayed behind, dressed to the nines in an elegant outfit. Her hair was immaculately styled, and she wore a luxurious fur coat that Daniel didn't recognize. From the window of the cafe across the street, he watched as she stepped into a cab, glancing at her watch nervously. Daniel followed the taxi in his own car, careful to maintain a safe distance. The vehicle eventually stopped at a posh restaurant in the heart of the city. Parking a short distance away, Daniel observed Amelia as she exited the cab and entered the brightly lit establishment. The sight of her illuminated by the restaurant's soft glow stirred something sharp and bitter within him. She looked radiant, confident, and excited, emotions she hadn't shown around him in months. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped out of his car and cautiously approached the large windows of the restaurant. Inside, Amelia sat at a table near the center of the room, laughing and raising her glass. But it wasn't her laughter that caught Daniel's attention. It was the man seated across from her, elegantly dressed in a suit, his hand resting casually on hers. Recognition hit Daniel like a tidal wave. It was Maverick, Amelia's ex-boyfriend, the one she had assured him she'd left behind when they first started dating. Memories of their early days together came rushing back, particularly Amelia's insistence that Maverick was ancient history. Yet here they were, looking anything but estranged. Daniel's gaze sharpened as Amelia reached into her bag and pulled out a familiar velvet box. She opened it, presenting the cufflinks with a bright, affectionate smile. Maverick leaned forward, pressing a kiss to her cheek as he accepted the gift. The scene shattered any lingering hope Daniel had been clinging to. His hands clenched into fists, his mind racing with disbelief and fury. He had trusted her, built a life with her, sacrificed for her, and now she sat across from her ex as if their marriage meant nothing. Unable to contain his anger, Daniel stormed into the restaurant. The clamor of his footsteps drew Amelia's attention. When their eyes met, her expression shifted from joy to horror. She stumbled to her feet, trying to form words, but Daniel didn't give her the chance. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chatter of the other diners. Before Maverick could react, Daniel grabbed the man's collar, his fury spilling over. The waitstaff rushed to intervene, pulling him away from the startled pair. Turning to Amelia, Daniel's voice cracked with rage. "I never want to see you again. You can rot in this mess you've made, but you're not coming back into my life." With that, he stormed out, leaving her frozen in shock. Back in his car, Daniel's thoughts swirled with anger and heartbreak. But he wasn't done. He knew Maverick was married, and he wouldn't let him escape unscathed. Daniel wasted no time. Once he calmed himself enough to think clearly, he called one of his mutual friends who knew Maverick's wife. With a steady voice, he explained everything he'd seen: Amelia, Maverick, the cufflinks, and the intimate dinner at the restaurant. His friend confirmed what Daniel suspected. Maverick's wife had no idea what her husband was up to. Armed with this information, Daniel made a decision. That same evening, he contacted Maverick's wife directly. "I thought you should know what's been happening," Daniel said, keeping his tone steady despite the storm raging inside him. He sent her photos and videos he'd taken from outside the restaurant, showing her husband and Amelia together. Her reaction was immediate and raw: shock, then anger, then heartbreak. "This isn't the first time," she admitted through tears. "But I never thought he'd go this far." She thanked Daniel for telling her and assured him she would take action. Meanwhile, Amelia tried to reach out to Daniel, bombarding him with calls and messages. He ignored every one. Her attempts to explain herself became increasingly desperate, oscillating between tearful apologies and defiant justifications. "It wasn't what it looked like," she claimed in a voice note. "He's just an old friend." But Daniel knew better. He blocked her number, unable to stomach her lies any longer. The fallout was swift and brutal. Maverick's wife wasted no time kicking him out of their house. Friends and family on both sides began to hear about the scandal, and the once polished facade that Amelia and Maverick had tried to maintain crumbled entirely. Amelia wasn't spared, either. Word spread among her circle of friends, many of whom turned their backs on her after hearing about her betrayal. The apartment she had once shared with Daniel became a lonely reminder of the life she had destroyed. Daniel, for his part, focused on moving forward. On New Year's Day, he filed for divorce. The process was straightforward. There was no question of reconciliation. He wanted nothing to do with Amelia, and he made that abundantly clear in their brief communications through lawyers. But Amelia wasn't ready to let go. In the weeks that followed, she made several attempts to see him. She showed up uninvited at his workplace, only to be turned away by security. On one occasion, she even left a handwritten letter at his friend's house, begging for forgiveness and asking for a second chance. Daniel remained resolute. He'd heard it all before: the promises, the excuses, the pleas for understanding. This time, he wouldn't let himself be drawn back into the cycle of lies and betrayal. Maverick didn't fare much better. His attempts to reconcile with his wife were met with cold rejection. Daniel later heard through mutual friends that Maverick and Amelia had tried to continue their relationship in the aftermath of the scandal, but it quickly fell apart under the weight of their guilt and the scrutiny of those around them. Daniel felt a weight lift as the final threads of his toxic relationship unraveled. The divorce was finalized without any delays, leaving him free from the chaos Amelia had brought into his life. For him, the end of their marriage marked a new beginning, a chance to rebuild and focus on his own happiness without the shadow of betrayal hanging over him. Amelia's life, however, seemed to spiral further out of control. Her attempts to reconcile with Daniel failed at every turn, and she became increasingly isolated. The veneer of the perfect wife she had so carefully cultivated shattered, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices alone. Friends distanced themselves, her reputation was tarnished, and she struggled to regain any semblance of stability. Maverick's fallout was just as dramatic. His wife refused to take him back, and their separation became permanent. He and Amelia, both exposed and ostracized, tried to carry on together briefly, but their relationship disintegrated under the weight of their actions. It became clear that the thrill of their affair had been built on lies, and once the dust settled, there was nothing left to hold them together. For Daniel, the experience was painful but transformative. He learned to value himself and recognize the importance of setting boundaries. He spent time reconnecting with friends and family, rediscovering parts of himself that had been neglected during his marriage. Though the scars of betrayal lingered, they served as a reminder of his resilience and strength. As he reflected on everything that had happened, Daniel knew one thing for certain: he would never allow himself to be taken for granted again. The new year, though marked by a tumultuous start, became a symbol of hope and renewal. To anyone who found themselves in a similar position, Daniel's advice was simple: trust your instincts and don't settle for less than you deserve. Life is too short to waste on people who don't value you. The lesson was clear. Betrayal might shatter the foundations of trust, but it could never break the spirit of someone determined to rise above it. If you found this story thought-provoking, like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell for more real-life stories.